Thank you, and welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss some conclusions I've drawn from studying American history. You may not agree with some of my conclusions or any of my conclusions, but you should at least know about the topics that I discuss, and even more to be conversant in American history. So we're beginning a little an odd side note. Some interesting words appeared in the late 1700s in America. Words like bogus, which meant a fake coin in 1797. Eventually, anything that was fake could be called bogus. The word veteran had only meant someone with experience, but a book published in 1798 specifically referred to those who had fought in the Revolution. It wasn't until 1848 that we started using the term vets as a shortened form of the word. When Presbyterian James McGready took religion to the wilds of Kentucky, holding camp meetings for the pioneers, those meetings also began to be called revivals. Speaking of revival, with the established state-funded churches now gone, all Christian denominations practice what the old Puritans would have called experimental religion, with many denominations gathered in associations. What happened next was the Great Revival of 1800, which was furthered by such Christian preachers as Methodist John McGee, Presbyterian James McGready, and a preacher called Father Rice, not meant in a Catholic sense, and Baptist John Taylor in Kentucky. As Taylor and Richard Kay began preaching in Kentucky, the revival spread throughout the South and into New England. Thousands were added to these churches, and believers' baptism and highly emotionally charged meetings took place. Excuse me. In places where dead orthodoxy and dry formalism had been the norm, there was a renewed joy in worship, and what is much more important, individual people's lives were changed from sin to attempting to live in a way that would be pleasing to God. With drunkenness a growing national problem, as some Americans would start their day off with rum and finish it with another alcoholic drink, the need to renew God's people to seek after his righteousness was important. This revival hit different times, different states at different times as it moved around the country. People have been turned off by the religious excesses of those who wish to force you to follow God's precepts by law rather than by the prompting of the Holy Spirit, and the sanctification promised by Jesus when you immerse yourself in his word were being brought into churches in droves. Okay, the first vice president of the country became the second president as John Adams was sworn in on March 4th, 1797. As vice president, he was known to have a love for the pomp and circumstance of the kings of Europe and was often labeled by his enemies as a monarchist. As president, he brought in Washington's cabinet to serve in his administration, which was a mistake, as they secretly were going to Alexander Hamilton for advice until after Washington's death, when he felt free to make a change. Adams' entire administration was dominated by trouble in Europe as the nations of Europe fought with Napoleon and the growing French Empire. France, our ally, wanted us to join in the war against Great Britain. They refused to recognize any diplomat sent to them and threatened to hang any Americans they found on British ships they captured. In 1798, he received word that agents of the French government, simply known as X, Y, and Z, had demanded a bribe before American diplomats would be received by the foreign minister Talleyrand. Rather than go to war, he attempted to get Congress to change Washington's policy of neutrality so American merchantmen could be armed to defend themselves. Excuse me. When he was met with strong Democratic Republican, that's Jefferson's party, resistance, he made his information public, and the rallying cry, millions for defense and not 1 cent for tribute, went up. Preparations for war with France moved swiftly. Washington was called back as commander of a new United States Army. At his insistence, Alexander Hamilton was named second in command. Congress then established the Department of the Navy with Adams appointed Benjamin Stoddert as the first Secretary of the Navy. The frigates United States, Constitution, and Constellation were the first warships of the United States Navy that grew to a fleet of 49 ships by 1799. Captain Thomas Truxton of the Constellation captured 2 French frigates, the Insurgent and the Vengeance, in conflicts in the West Indies. In all, 85 French vessels were seized before peace was made. As part of the war scare, and keep this in mind when reading current events, the Federalist Strong Government Party passed the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 that gave the government unusual powers to imprison aliens and citizens who threatened or opposed the federal government. These acts were used by Adams to shut down newspapers and silence opponents in a way that threatened the Bill of Rights. In a way that shocked both Federalist and Democratic Republican parties, Adams proposed in early 1799 renewed attempts to establish diplomatic relations with France, which avoided all-out war. The Federalists were upset by Adams' avoidance of war, as Alexander Hamilton, who had assumed the role of commander after Washington's death, looked for military glory from such a venture. Hamilton ruined Adams' chances of re-election by circulating a letter, excuse me, sorry about this, insisting that Adams was unfit for office and using information gotten from the members of Adams' cabinet who were working against him. I refer you to the book Alexander Hamilton, American by Richard Brookhiser. He lost the election a few days after he moved into the new capital at Washington, D.C. on November 1st, 1800, and he spent several unpleasant months waiting for Congress to decide whether his Vice President Thomas Jefferson or Aaron Burr would succeed him. He refused to attend Jefferson's inauguration, either out of bitterness for the betrayals he had endured or, as some state, simply because he wasn't invited. Abigail Adams was a different kind of first lady than Martha Washington. She was outspoken, and even John Adams' first mention of her in his diary when she was only 14 was that she was quote, a wit. Her sharp tongue and strong views were part of her personality. Morrison says that Abigail did not like the high society and snobbery of the Philadelphia elite. Abigail had married John Adams against her parents' wishes and continued to be her own person, as she often complained about how her duties kept her from having time for herself. By the time Adams took office, inflation had ruined the buying power of the president's salary, so the entertaining, which came out of his own pocket, was difficult and hard to afford. But she managed to tend to the president's social responsibilities and still save money. The president discussed many important problems with her, and she most certainly had a say in his decisions. She did not like the new and unfinished federal capital at Washington. So we're going to start talking about Washington the next time, a few things, and then we'll go on to Jefferson and the next our next topics. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.